I think everything is working. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order here. It is the 4th of November, 2024. It's 4 p.m. We'll kick off with a roll call in a moment. I just want to open though by pointing out we have a hard stop at 6 p.m. today due to a committee meeting. I believe it's ASCC that's following. Yeah, so we will do that. We're starting with the roll call. I am here. Stephen Casani.
Here.
Ken Levine. Chris Rittler.
Here.
Michelle Takai.
Here.
William Urban.
Here.
Mark Wacer.
Here.
All right, the entire committee is here. We have a quorum. That's great. Next point here is oral communications for items not on the agenda. Anyone here in the room? Anyone online? I see a hand online from Rita Thomas. Rita, would you like to speak to us?
Yes, thank you very much for taking my comment. In looking over the documents, there seems to be some updated documents that are missing. And I know you can't just send it out to us right now, but in previous meetings, it was talked about that certain documents had been updated. And I don't see the updated documents within the audit package. And I know that's part of the agenda, but for future meetings, if anything has been updated and it could be noted what has been updated, it just seems like there's something missing in the audit paperwork that's just not there. Thank you.
Can you specify, Rita, what's missing?
Yeah, for the past couple of meetings, it was noted by our finance person that some paperwork was inadvertently given to the auditors, and it was going to then be updated. And that was the reason why, the town council couldn't make any, say anything about it because it was needed to be updated. And these documents were signed by the auditors back in March. So I was looking for where these documents were then updated and perhaps a new signature or something with a more recent date. It is November for those documents. And so it just was not following. And what paperwork and, our finance person could probably say what documents, what pieces were updated, but it just doesn't read for what has been updated. And I would really like to see a new signature by our auditors if things had been changed from when they signed off on it in March. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Okay.
Changes were immaterial.
Okay. Alrighty, anyone else on items not on the agenda? Okay, we will proceed to announcements and presentations. I don't believe we have any. And then next, approval of the minutes of the last meeting, which is October 15th. Do I have a motion to approve those? Okay. Yeah. Yep.
I just turned on my mic too. I'm sorry for those of you who are not in the room. I don't think there was a consensus. There were simply two people who spoke.
Okay.
And so if we could just change that, since this is monitoring what we said at the meetings, simply state that there were comments that the current 60%
Okay.
should.
There were comments that, so strike seemed to be consensus. Would that work?
Yep.
Okay. Fair enough. Any objection to that? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes subject to this change being made?
I will so move.
Second? In favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. I will update the minutes with the change. Thank you, Ken. Obviously, since you had a concern, that proves there's no consensus, so we'll fix that. It's, um, good. All right, so we have the minutes done. Now, we will move to new business. The main item today is the much delayed discussion of the fiscal year 2021 audit, including the management discussion and analysis and memorandum of internal controls. We can kick it off with a few words from Tony.
George, can you bring up the audited statements?
Okay. On the share?
Yes, yeah.
Will do.
Changes that were made were to the
Yep.
management discussion and analysis.
Okay.
Document.
And where would you like me to scroll to?
Keep going down.
Okay.
After that,
You Give me a page and I can go there directly. if that
yeah,
helps.
if you can see the table of contents, sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Um,
I'll go back up to that.
Page 5, so it should start right after the audited letter.
Okay. In here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of the changes were grammatical and syntax. It was a scratch that I was working from that I sent to the auditors. It was not the complete document. The major corrections were made in the fund analysis, which is, you scroll down. Last pages, I think page 8 or 9. It was mostly the observations and the fund financial statement analysis. And you scroll down a little bit more. The fund budgetary highlights, basically where we compared and contrasted the actuals to the budgetary. And also what were some of the major changes in expenses from year to year. For 2021, probably the largest expense was, that's the year we set up the OPEB trust, about $550,000. So that was the most significant increase in expenses from that year. Revenues exceeded budget in some areas. But the way these paragraphs were written were not, they were from the prior year, and I was actually in the process of updating it, and I sent the wrong draft to the auditors. So, but the changes that were highlighted or not included in the original package are immaterial. There was no change in the numbers. Just a little bit more explanation on the changes of expenses from year to year. But from this report, our ending fund balance was 5.1 million. And kind of started the whole process of recalculating where our fund balance reserve was for this year. So this was the actual document that started the whole process for me. The audited statements are going to look similar from year to year, and the MOIC, which we're going to talk about later, those are going to be, the findings are going to be repeat findings for next year, or 21, 22, 22, 23, and then 23, 24, they'll be corrected and changed. But that's my presentation on the audited financial statements for 2021.
Okay. Questions, clarifying questions from members of the committee before we hear from the public, and then after that, we'll have a discussion. Start with Bill and move this way if anybody has anything.
No, I'll pass for now.
Just one question, Tony. Would you say that these, that this document accurately reflects the financial statements for the year ended June 30, 21 as best you can tell, recognizing that you weren't here at the time?
I will quote the auditor, reasonably reflects the financial position of, yeah, there's still some corrections we can make, but it's not grossly overstated or understated. There's still some corrections to be made. But it's reasonably assured that this is our financial statement or our financial position as of this date.
And then this is more clarification for people maybe who've listened, is that in order to catch up to where we are to where we are today, we need to go back. We cannot do it in reverse chronology. We have to do it in the sequence because one year builds upon the previous, In order to move forward, we have to get this done first, and then you go to the next years, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's a sequential process.
Yeah.
So I have a question with regard to the complexity of the statements themselves. It seems to me, I've been on the committee for a number of years, and it seems to me, first of all, I recognize you weren't here previously, but I assume our annual audited statements are similar to most other cities.
Yes, there's GASB 34, so our statements are in accordance with the GASB statement, starting with 34 and subsequent statements since then. But yeah, all financial statements issued by cities and towns need to comply with GASB.
Okay, so it seems to me that GASB has gotten much more complex in
Yes.
terms of what has to be reported, and that our statements are many pages longer and more detailed than they were a dozen years ago, 10 years ago, maybe
Correct.
5. Is that correct?
That is correct. GASB was given a hammer and they think everything's in it.
So it's more complex today than it was in the past.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And
Thank
then
you.
there are new pronouncements. So like the next one coming up is leases. And you're going to have to figure out a way to recognize the leases on our balance statement, and also recognize the use of the asset on our balance sheet.
Great.
Yes.
Glad to see that things are getting more and more complex. Thank you.
I don't have any questions. I don't either.
One item that you may not be able to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, that jumped out at me on the governmental activities chart on page 10. It shows that we had investment earnings of 400,000 in 2019-20, and then that dropped to 153 in 2021. Is that was the investment earnings in 19-20? Is that just due to higher interest rates pre-COVID?
That was pre-COVID.
That makes up that difference. Thank you.
Chris? Okay, nothing from Chris. Anything from the public? Right now, we're discussing the memorandum, or rather management discussion and analysis portion of the audit. Hands? Don't see any hands on that right now. Oh, I do. Yes, Rita, your hand is up.
I'm sorry, I'm back to my same question. Now that this document's been updated, will the auditors have a chance to review it and compare it to the other document? And, as far as I know, Cindy Rojas, who was our financial director in our town, is still employed by the town. Did she have a chance to participate either in the early draft of this particular document or, but what I'd like to see is I'd like to see our auditors, and you can say, oh, it's going to cost us $50,000, and maybe I'd say something different for them to look at it again. But, we're trying to clean up in order to move forward. So we've been waiting a long time. Thank you.
The auditors did review this draft of the MD&A.
Okay, so they've already been through this. I guess that's the answer.
Yes.
Okay. Other hands out there? And I have to scroll since we're
Oh,
sharing.
and to follow up, Cindy was involved in this preparation of the financial statement.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I don't see more hands on that. So further discussion here of the MDA, or should we move on to MOIC?
I have one comment to make. It's just a clarification of what we just talked about on page, back on the page about investment earnings. I think it was on page 12, page 12. It's just a clarification so that people don't misunderstand what the town's investing in. We say investment earnings decreased by 62.18% due to the town's investment in Schwab securities. It should say, fixed income, exchange traded funds and securities held at Schwab. I don't want anyone to get the impression we're buying Schwab stock, which of course would be prohibited. I just wanted to make that clarification.
It is also further clarified in one of the notes in where our investments are, because that's a requirement as well.
Yeah.
So one of the footnotes does break down where our investments are. And
I'll have a further comment on that. I think we're going to, later on, we're going to talk about the basic financial statements, the auditors, there's a couple of clarifications in the notes that need to be similarly, specified more correctly.
Additional comments? Okay. I think we've talked about MDA. Can we move on to the memorandum of internal control?
yeah,
Where does that start? What page?
that's a document.
But I meant in our packet. Yeah. Yep. Okay, yep.
Yeah, keep going.
I'm using the official packet, not the separate files. There we go.
So the MIC is the memorandum on internal control. Here's where the auditor lists what they consider significant deficiencies in internal controls and then gives the town an opportunity to respond. We basically, our response to these is that we recognize and agree with the auditor's findings and that we are in the process of implementing policies and procedures that will alleviate this finding in future years. But this document is going to read the exact same for next fiscal year and the following fiscal year. And our response is going to be the same, that we recognize and agree with the auditor's findings. But for 23-24, those findings will be eliminated.
Questions from the committee?
Tony, I have a general question. So on each of these findings, where do you record your action to address them?
It'll be on this document.
So, yeah,
So basically where it says the town recognizes and agrees about exactly working on, so whichever deficiency is, then we're going to develop and implement procedures and policies. So like for segregation of duties, the issue was we only had 2 folks in finance staff doing everything. And so like you could not segregate the duties of cash receipts and cash handling. You had overlap. And for an auditor, that's a area of, when it comes to cash is king.
yeah,
So
I understand that. What I guess I was looking for was maybe a page that has each of the findings.
well, I
And
can,
then if it's open or closed, and if it's open, by when you expect to close it.
I can write one up and bring it to the finance committee.
I mean.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Because I have a feeling you probably have some of these addressed.
Some of them were addressed before I started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so,
Yeah. But we have to respond
yeah, I
to
understand. that.
this fiscal year.
No, I get that. No, I get that. So, but I think, as you said, since these are going to be repeated,
Mhm.
I mean, they're general findings. that-
Right.
And since they're going to be repeated, I think it would be good
Mhm.
to share with the finance committee just where
Okay.
we're at on these actions.
Okay, I can prepare that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Tony, could you address the issue that, like the cash that you just described, we only had two people, so it was hard to meet the requirement. It strikes me that we're cutting back on numbers of employees, employed by the town. Right. Does that mean that we're likely to have these problems once again? Are they just going to crop up because we don't have enough people to have the controls that we should have?
Right, well, we currently have 3 in finance, then plus me, so there's 4. So we have enough folks in place to alleviate that. But yeah, if we were to reduce staff, then we would have to come up with some compensating controls in order to keep the significant deficiencies off the list.
So you're saying that even though we may cut back, that's part of the plan, there are actions you could take that would still
Right,
protect us, but not necessarily with lots of people, but there'd be other ways of doing it.
right. It would be other staff wearing many hats. And so as long as it's, like when it comes to cash, as long as we have an independent count or there's an independent log of the checks that come in, as long as it's not the person who's actually doing the deposit, then we're okay. And we can spread that around.
Thank you.
So I hate to bring up ancient history. So when we only had 0.6, Stacy, you think that's what was happening? Other people on the town staff was, I know you weren't here.
I wasn't here, but I mean, I mean, they were all operating in their silos and, I mean, planning and development had their issues and public works and finance rarely interact. But it is, staffing levels do have an impact on internal controls, but it starts from the top.
So we probably had these comments for the past 20, 30, I mean, for a long, again, we had points, we had one half part-time
Right, we have-
person.
Yeah,
And our town manager was sort of like the
Mhm.
director. So we must have been having these.
I
comments.
haven't seen previous years, but
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that, again, part of the problem being on this committee for so long, what did we do
right.
when we had no staff?
Right. Right, but the part of the reason that we fell behind so far was that we
Because we
only
had
had
staff.
2 people doing these. And it's not just the audit, there's also the annual reporting that we have to do to the controller's office, gas tax reporting, streets reports, and, that's just within finance, with Measure A, Measure M, Measure W, and the library, and these things stack up. And once you fall behind exponentially, and just playing catch up, and it becomes overwhelming.
Did the policies and procedures in place at that time just not anticipate this as a potential issue, or were they ignored from above? And fair enough. And given the policies and procedures we're putting in place now, I assume this is going to be very explicit in terms of what needs to be followed, even if employment levels or PTE
Right,
levels.
as
fall
of
off.
right now, not one person can go from start to begin, from start to end with the process that comes through finance. So there's always gonna be someone else looking at it, reviewing it, signing off on it, approving it, and that was implemented within the past year. And as long as I'm here, that's the way it's gonna go.
I'm going to bring up some topics that Tony can't really speak to again for the same reason.
I'll
We're looking at
try.
history here and you weren't here, but what struck me, reading through this memorandum, the cause, I'll ask you this question, Tony, the cause that was written for each of these, was that written by Mays and Associates?
Yes,
Okay. And who did they talk to, as far as you know, in coming to that definition of cause?
this would be generated by their interviews with staff. Because they're part of the audit process is a review of internal control. So they have standard questions that they ask. And then based on those answers, then it says, okay, well, maybe we need to do some more testing than this. And so when they do the review and say, hey, this wasn't approved, how did this get in? Then that's how they would generate this report.
Would that just be finance staff
Um,
for this purpose?
Well, they could possibly talk to town manager. They could also talk to department heads. Just kind of give they get an understanding of how the documents flow through the system, how they get approved.
Okay, without naming names, what are the names of the titles of the type of people in the finance jobs that would have been?
Would have
Ask these
been
questions.
like the finance technician, and then the finance director.
You know, my take on the cause, these don't sound to me like causes of what happened. These are conditions that existed in the town. There was a COVID epidemic, which, kept people out of the office, changed the way they did work. There were not enough people available. We weren't able to hire new people. I think they're sort of secondary issues to the underlying cause of why our financials couldn't be kept updated for, close to 3.5 years. I think the real causes are things like available staff maybe didn't have enough training. They didn't have enough resources of other types. Maybe they didn't know how to do their jobs well enough. Maybe they had problems and they didn't have anyone they could trust to raise them to. I mean, the thing that came to me from all this is, how could it be that this committee or the council wouldn't have gotten much earlier indications that we didn't have financial data we could rely on? I didn't get firm understanding that we didn't have financial data we could rely on until about a year and a half ago. That was long before Tony was here, of course, but when we were, I just rejoined the committee and we were looking into how we were managing our cash. And I found pretty quickly into that we didn't have good data on, where the money was and, how it was being used and so forth. But there must have been, I would have hoped there would have been some indication to this committee or to the council before that, there weren't enough people to do the basic functions of finance, or we didn't have people who understood how to do their jobs well enough. Things that actually cause records to not be updated or for them not to be updated for months or years. But more troubling thing out of all that is what happened because of that. And I got the sense that very little happened that would have alleviated the problem. I mean, I get the sense that most of my colleagues on this council really didn't understand, have a sense of, how bad things had gotten in terms of how current the data was. I guess I'll ask you, is that a correct understanding? You didn't have an idea of it because it wasn't raised. It makes me wonder, what was the culture in the town going on that our committees and our council weren't able to see what was happening? I think to me, that's the major failure. It was a failure of management oversight. I mean, at the committee or council level, to see that there were problems developing, they weren't being solved. We didn't have any thing that was being done to address them. And we kind of went merrily on for a couple of years before it got to the point about 6 to 9 months ago that we found the data was just terrible. I mean, we could find out on any given day how much money the town had. We only have 4 accounts, right? We've got we have the bank account at B of A, we've got Tech CU, we've got the LAF account, and we've got the Schwab brokerage account. And on any given day, a number of people in town, maybe on the council, could look in those accounts and we knew how much money we have. What we didn't know is what buckets they were supposed to be in, because they're all commingled at the finance institutions as single account numbers, and whatever accounting system we were doing internally was a manual process. I mean, it maybe used computers and electronics, but it had to be a manual input process, and it wasn't being done. And we didn't know that, and we didn't understand what impact that had on all the decisions we were and weren't making, like how fast our reserves were running down. I mean, even a year ago, Tony, I think we didn't know that our reserves had dropped because this money we had, a large portion of it doesn't get assigned to the general fund. It was going to restricted funds and other places, and we didn't have any documentation or trail on all that until you
Right.
started uncovering it in February and March. So there was at some level, there was a human failure in probably in multiple places to identify a problem, to take it seriously enough to address the need for changes or intervention of some sort. And unfortunately, I think our citizens would have expected us to do that. I mean, we've talked on this committee several times over the last year and a half about what our role is. And, if we see an issue or an area we want to discuss or intervene in, we can't make decisions. We can't force anybody to do anything, but we can decide what types of things we want to think about. We can make recommendations to the council. We can make recommendations to staff. We can ask questions. We can do all those things. But maybe we weren't doing those things in these important areas because of a lack of information about what was going on. And I'm still troubled that that happened. I have a fair amount of confidence we're not at that same place now. But frankly, up until about 6 months ago, I would have, if I knew now what I did 6 months ago, I'd still say we still haven't got a grip on the problem. We had to look at ourselves. We have had that discussion within this committee about, can we go to the town manager and say, we think you ought to do X, Y, and Z? What's your response? Are you going to do it? You can do something else, or if you're not going to do it, if not, tell us why. Or do we have to wait for the town manager or even, finance director to come to us and ask for our opinion on something? I vote for the first. And if there's nothing that would convince you about that, what's happened the last 3 years should be the evidence. If we have something we think about, or we're not certain about, or we're wondering about, we should be able to ask questions, intervene, and do much more of an oversight than, and I think the council might be in the same place. I don't know how much oversight they were doing within the financial function, even during a large part of the time the previous town manager was there. I know they had their hands full with a lot of other things, but this is not something you can let go for any number of years, or you end up in a situation like we are now. So, sorry for the long-winded response, but that's kind of what still troubles me about, how we got, it reminds me of the old Watergate years when, the most important question that came out of all those hearings was what's famous now, which is, what did they know and when did they know it?
Right.
And that applies in an important way to what's, we've gone through in this town the last 3.5, 4 years.
And just to add one more, another thing that we're going through is we were implementing the new financial software system.
Yeah, and this was.
And
Yeah.
that was a massive headache.
Right, and this was the point I wanted to bring up, because my recollection during this period, Bill, was that at least what I was told by Jeremy Dennis when he was town manager during this time was, I remember just as COVID was hitting, Jeremy proposed investing more and more modern software that would improve transparency and take us into, the 21st century sort of thing in terms of having everything online. And we had the world's most primitive financial accounting software, et cetera. So we began implementing OpenGov as the new financial system. And I recall that while all this was happening, the reason we couldn't do audits that I remember being told is because we had to operate 2 financial systems at the same time because some of the modules in OpenGov weren't working. And so we had to rely on the old one, but then we had to somehow tie that to the modules that were working in OpenGov. And it just became like, keeping 2 sets of books, not because you're trying to hide the numbers, but because you have 2 different software packages, one that's not quite working yet, and the other one that you're trying to keep working with until the other one is working. And it never really came together. At least it didn't come together for a very, very long time.
Right. And there were still issues with the software that some of our other departments were using, like building and planning uses Energov and OpenGov weren't communicating. And then there was, I always get this one wrong, Community Pass, that our parks and our field rental software, that wasn't feeding into OpenGov as well. So it was developing those types of processes so the implementations or the imports can work. For 23, 24, those, I'm happy to say that those are working. But for 21, 22 and 22, 23, that's why there's incomplete revenue in those years because we're still going through and updating the revenue as we go. But yeah, but that also played a part in it as well as because we only had two.
So again, with two employees,
Yeah.
just the key first point is OpenGov is working now. And
For the
so,
most part, yeah.
yeah, so, but adequately to keep the finances in control
Yeah,
going forward? Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of teasing I had to do to get the information out of there,
Okay,
but it's, I mean, it's in there.
all right,
So, I mean, I can say it's in there, but it's just pulling it out, and putting it in a presentable form.
yeah.
I've got to do a lot of exporting to Excel and updating Excel
Yeah.
worksheets.
So in retrospect, one conclusion I'm taking from this personally is that it was foolhardy for us to agree to transition to a whole new type of accounting software with only two employees in all of finance running things. In other words, we underestimated the upgrade. I would have preferred to stay with the old creaky things that worked. Or you have an implementation team and program that you feel certain of to one side. But not that we just say, oh, this will be great and off we go.
Right, we probably, I mean, we were using OpenGov. OpenGov was basically the consultants that were handling the implementation.
Yeah. They're the people that sold us the software. Right, okay.
Another source of the difficulty at that time was that not only did we go to OpenGov, we also changed our chart of accounts. So we had two chart of accounts, the old system, the new system, and it made it a lot more complex.
Yeah.
It was probably good, but that we did that now that we're past that, but it contributed to the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
So sitting here now, it may be a better and more improved thing to do, but to fully resource a transition of that sort, you shouldn't rely on the vendor, A, and
Right.
B, you can't just have your small staff that already has a full-time job, just keeping things running, doing that too, and
Mhm.
expect it to work.
Right,
I
I mean,
guess-
and just doing any software implementation like that, I mean, you still have to do your initial legwork of how the processes you're doing now, how that can transfer over into the new system, how your chart of accounts going to crosswalk over into your new system. And that, I just don't think there was a robust implementation process.
However, we did bring in a consultant. That's what adds to the consultant expense. That Jim
Yeah.
Sacco was brought in for quite some time, as I
Right.
recall, multiple years to help in that effort.
I note that the mayor has her hand up online. I'd like to hear from Sarah if we could. Sarah?
Thank you. I think it was Bill who was just speaking. And I just want to say I appreciate this candid conversation focused on a postmortem of how we got here. And I just want to corroborate a lot of what I heard from him, from my perspective. This is a result of the limited resources in town hall, and then especially not having adequate staff in finance, both the number of people and the experience level. I think at the time, particular starting in late 2021, going into 2022, there was increasing focus on both in town hall, in the council meetings, and in the community on housing related issues. And then that started the staff turnover in 2020 at the beginning of 2023. And so that was kind of the behind the scenes what was happening that led to the, imbalance of focus on these and other compliance issues. And I guess I would also agree that because of that, there was no indication that something was awry, or at least brought to my attention, just speaking for myself, until about 9 months ago. And then, of course, adding in, as has been said, the OpenGov. So I'm just wanted to share appreciation for the discussion about it and concur with a lot of what I've heard.
Thank you very much. Back to discussion here on the dais. Any additional points?
Just a couple of things that I would say is that from my perspective, not having lived through this period, really starting on the same day that Tony started, is that I think the objective of this meeting, I think, is for the finance committee to review what are prepared financial statements for a fiscal year that is at this point 3 years past. And I think is to actually make a recommendation, if that's been the tradition, for the finance committee to recommend or not the acceptance of these financial statements. From my perspective, I'll just say we should absolutely accept these, the town accept these for a number of reasons. Number one is that I have confidence in the financial expertise of Tony McFarland, recognizing that he was not here in that time. Two is that we have the same auditor who actually audited these accounts. There was not a change in audit. So the last one that was done and accepted by the town was fiscal year 2020. Three, just from a person who actually has, at this point, 3 years hence, looked at them, the changes look reasonable to me, although really, I think that's the third and least important of the three points. The most important is actually, I would kind of invert it. Auditor, same auditor, audited, and they've signed off on it. Two is that Tony, recognizing that it's long in the past, it actually managed that process. The last point with regard to the memorandum of internal control, I don't see that as an integral part of the audited financial statement. Yes, that is a memo that the auditors have for their client for improvement in the future, some of which have already been addressed. So I understand that, but it's also a bit of an artifact of history. I'm most focused on, okay, so if we collectively think that these financial statements, as best we can tell, accurately reflect the status of the town for the fiscal year 2021, let's actually recommend to the town council to accept them so that really then we can get to the next important critical step of then moving to the next subsequent years. Because I'm a bit concerned that if there is a huge amount of discussion and further requests for more work done, it's going to be expensive and timely and further delay the work done, which is necessary. And really what I think about is fundamentally is what Tony just said, cash is king. If we know where the cash was at the time and have those records, this is really an exercise of where should that cash have been and how should it have been allocated. The expenses were approved by in the warrant list, I'm sure, by the town council. So those now need to be recognized and accounted for properly, but ultimately it's around a recognition of the cash. And now, if this were a more complex institution that we had actually a similar complexity on the liability side, I would be similarly focused on the liability side, but I'm not. The liability side of this institution is actually quite simple. The only thing that gives me a little bit of concern on the liability side is the unfunded pension liability. That's the only thing that kind of gives me a little bit of concern, but we talked about that in sufficient length. So that would be my 2 cents for where we are now and what the purpose and objective of this meeting is so that we can move forward and really get to the next important point of then getting to 2022, 23, 24, which I think is critical because I think the further that gets delayed, the more expensive, and it tends to compound. So that would be my perspective on where we are on this particular topic.
Yeah, and I would add, Mark, that is the hope for outcome is, after a full discussion, if nobody has any material objections, then we would recommend, the finance committee would recommend to the town council that they accept the audit. Any other comments here before I take more public comment? Any more hands out there from the public? I see Christy C.
Yes, I was calling around to see what other council members or what other cities use. And I did find out that Woodside is using Springbrook. The other financial system commonly used in cities is called Tyler. We were using OpenGov, and it is not a common financial system for cities. So I just wanted to point that out on what I found out. They have one person on payroll, they have one person on accounts payable, one person for records and cash, and cash receiving, and one person is responsible for migrating the old planning and building program, which brings in cash with regular cash receiving system of Woodside and get them both up and running on a cloud-based system. So that's where Woodside is, just for your information.
Thank you. I know somebody with their hand up identified only by a phone number ending in 7562. Please tell us who you are and enter your comment.
Good evening, Caroline Vertongen. I will just make a short comment. I really appreciate all the work that the Finance Committee has done and the new Finance Director, and really mentioning everything that went wrong. It's important to understand what went wrong, and believe us, many in the community have raised questions, and many were angered because our questions were dismissed. But let's move on, and let's hope it doesn't happen again. And yeah, so thank you for all your work.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn. And we're going to do better than hope here. Hope is not a strategy. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's speaking for myself. Any other comments? Okay, I don't see anyone else online. More discussion here of the audit and the memorandum of internal controls.
Are we, is this the time or have we had discussion about the basic financial statements and any comments on those?
Happy to take comments on any of that.
Okay, well, since I have the microphone, let me just bring up the sort of the technical correction on note 2 of, this is the notes to the basic financial statements that were prepared by the auditor. Note 2 under cash and investments, some clarification points. There's a list under section C about the authorized investment types. It lists money market and mutual funds. That's too broad a definition. It should say money market and exchange traded funds. Again, we just want this, we're going to be carrying this forward for years, so we don't want to, have the same error carrying forward one year after another. So that's an easy fix. And similarly, at the bottom of that page, under section D, under interest rate risk, the same thing is repeated. The second line under investment type, we have money market mutual funds. That's incorrect. It should say fixed income, exchange traded funds, or mutual funds. Those are just technical, but we should get them right. I think that's all I had on that. Thanks.
Tony, did you get that?
Yeah, note 2.
Okay, great. Any other corrections or comments here?
But that, we'll make that correction for 22, 23.
Okay.
Unless it's an objection that changes the number, then we'll make the change in 21, 22.
Okay. Is anyone willing to recommend a motion to approve or recommend the town council approve and accept the audit?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, town council, rather, the finance committee is recommending that the town council accept the fiscal year 2021 audit. Fabulous. Now we'll move on to item 5B, which is an update on where we are in the town financial status. And this is where we'll talk about developments from since our last meeting. And we'll start with an introduction.
George, if I could have just one thing, because I was waiting for us to approve it, which I'm very glad that we did.
Oh,
I
sure.
did have a question though, that I think is a nice dovetails follow on to that, which is that really question for you, Tony. In our August 19th Finance Committee meeting, you had made a presentation for your estimate at that time as to when fiscal year audits would be completed. I just wanted to actually go back to that. This is my guess. This may get you off the hook a little bit. My guess is that that slipped a little bit. But what we said at the time in the minutes was that is that the fiscal year 22 should be ready by the end of December, 23 by the end of April, 24 by the end of June 2025. And then for 25, we should be then truly back on track for September 2025. Any update on for the expectation, particularly for the finance committee, as to what that schedule should look like at this point?
Yes, 21, 22, with everything that's been going on the past few weeks, that's going to be pushed back. So 21, 22 will be actually pushed back to where we were with 22, 23. And then, because we have to get back in line with the auditor's schedule. And there's still some items on 21, 22 that need to be corrected. And that's my decision. Because it's just the liabilities are way overstated. And it probably should have been corrected in 2021, but that's holding us up a little bit, plus with everything else that's been going on. So the audit schedule is going to be pushed back a few months. We're still going to have 24, 25 done by September. So we're still going to do 4 within 12 months, which is unheard of. But we're still planning on meeting that deadline.
I'm pleasantly surprised to hear you say that, but just for clarification, so for 2021, April of 2025, again, recognizing that this is just an estimate at this point, for 22, 23, is that also April? Or is that, we should just push everything back?
Yeah, push everything. Yeah, we missed the deadline for December. So
Yep.
we're just going to push everything back.
Okay, so then, okay,
No, it's the same schedule. It's just, so 2020 or 21, 22 is supposed to be in December. That's going to be in April. And then 22, 23 is going to be June. And then 23, 24. We'll try and do that.
okay.
We should have everything. If we make all the corrections now, it should all flow through and we should be good to go.
Right, it should be easier.
Yeah.
If everything is up to date. We just,
From your perspective, is there anything that the finance committee can do to maximize the probability of having you and the team make that schedule? If the answer is no, great, but if there is, let us know.
At this time, no, but who knows what's going to happen in 5 months, 6 months. So I just, once we get through this budget, then we'll be able to focus more on, because a lot of what's holding me up is actually have to review and approve the proposed journal entries that are being made to correct a lot of it.
Thank
Okay.
you, George. Appreciate
oh,
it.
great. Well, yeah, thank you for that, Mark. That was helpful. And Tony, yeah, do keep us posted
Yes.
on anything we can do to help, because everyone's eager to get to next September and have this all dialed in. Once again. All right, now we'll transition to item 5B. And Tony, perhaps you can introduce us to the latest on the financial status
Yeah.
of the town.
So, last council meeting, was basically a conversation. Or I wanted to have a conversation with the council, just kind of recap what's been discussed in the finance committee and just where we are with the budget and the reserves, and seek direction from council. So I've got a little matrix here that, based on the summary that the finance committee presented, that was also brought up in the discussion with council. So it was short-term options, long-term options. So short-term option number 1 was a balanced budget. Council said yes. So I'm in the process of revising the budget. So where there's 0 or a surplus, and I'll be coming back to council on the 13th. Charge housing element expenses to affordable housing fund. Council direction on that was no. Charge open space maintenance work to open space fund. There was a yes, but with the caveat that this is not the first place that we go to make that happen. And also the dollar amount is going to be it's 57,000 total. they said, focus it only on the amounts that's open space, not necessarily trails maintenance, but what's impacting open space. So we might not even go there for 24, 25. Redirect UUT from open space fund to general fund. That was a no. Parcel tax was a no. The lease back with San Mateo County. Council wanted more information, but the majority of the council seemed to be in favor of this. There was, Councilmember Haskell wanted more information before she was open to it, but there was more information that she needed. And we're in the process of collecting that information. But to summarize, basically, the county could not loan the town money. This is the vehicle that they have in place, and basically we offer up a piece of property, gets appraised, and then whatever the dollar amount that we're requesting, the county will give it to us up front, and then the repayment will be through property tax allocations in future years. The
And
interest-
just clarification, by a lease, is this a sale lease back where we sell them the property and then we lease it back, or
It's just a
explain how
lease,
this
it's
works?
a lease back.
But a lease back, but we own it, so.
Yes, but they will be able to use it.
Oh, I see. So
So-
we're leasing it to them.
Right.
In exchange for
They
money
give
back
us,
to us.
they'll give us
Right.
money up
And
front.
then we pay them back over time.
Right.
And then their lease expires and they get to use that property.
Right. But I mean, they're not gonna put a building there or,
Okay.
you know, it's just, this is the vehicle that they've, Half Moon Bay used it for financing, a building. We're not asking for a lot. It's gonna be $1 million. And then this is just going to shore up our reserves over the next couple of years until we get to the charter amendment. And then, if the charter town vote passes, the revenue starts coming in, then we'll start the repayment process.
So in theory, the cash could be segregated in an interest-bearing account and not used.
Exactly. And use of the funds will be directed by council. But the concern is that even with the reserves at where they are, if something should happen over the next 2 years, natural disaster, fire, earthquake, that we have access to some funds to help keep our reserve levels intact and keep operating. Because if we have to go through FEMA for reimbursement, that could take 4 or 5 years.
Sorry, I watched the recording and there was some discussion about what the effective cost to the or benefit to the town was. And the way I heard it in the meeting, it wasn't confirmed, was that effectively it was a way for the town to, lease back, but the net effect, cash flow was it would cost the town about 2%.
Correct.
To obtain, an amount of money which was going to be equal to whatever the fair market value was of the
Mhm.
affected property. Has that been confirmed? That,
My understanding that was the quote from the county, that it was 2%. And our earnings are more than that. So,
so that makes it pretty attractive, even if. we
right.
didn't-
And it's going to be very, very short term.
Do you know about how long it takes to initiate and close, and if what the cost of doing so is?
We're still collecting that information. The town attorney is actually we're actually gonna have a meeting. I think it's sometime this week, time to go over all that.
As
information.
a finance guy, I like the arbitrage of 2% money if we can invest higher. I don't like the idea of the town borrowing money to shore up its reserves. Just the concept strikes me as I don't know, difficult. Reason I asked the timing question, I could see using this in an emergency situation. I'm hesitant to use it up front and have this cash sitting somewhere that technically maybe can't be accessed except for an emergency, but is that true? And what are the,
Well, it would be in the general fund.
Right.
But again, like I said, we'll structure it that accessing these funds is going to be through council direction only.
Yeah, I guess the counter to that would be that if we didn't have the money in the bank and there's an emergency, it might affect the whole county, so no one would want to do it then. Because normally I'd agree with you, Steve, that I don't want to borrow money just so it looks good on the balance sheet, but if it is for emergencies, if the emergency happens, no one will want to give us the money.
We'd already have it.
Yeah, but already having it is the operative part, right? Because again, in an emergency, there'll be a lot of competing needs where everyone
Mhm.
else will be scrambling for the same sort of thing.
Right. And plus, we'll still be completing the audits and the reserve balance is going to be
Yeah.
fluctuating up and down.
Yeah, and I think it was what, 1998 or thereabouts when Upper Alpine Road washed out. It was in the late 90s when we had this El Nino deluge that really did a lot of damage in town. And at that time, we had a lot of cash, fortunately, so we could spend it and wait for FEMA.
Right, and the other thing is this also, without having the revenue or the vote in March, I mean, the quote was $120,000 just for the special election. So this is $20,000. And we can shore up our reserves until we get to the charter amendment.
When I put on my finance hat, I find that flexibility trumps everything else, and we need the money. The second comment is that this all is predicated the limiting the borrowing or the lease back to $1 million is predicated upon the budget that you're putting together. And that budget is a bare bones budget for the town, as I understand it. It hasn't
Absolutely.
been fully vetted yet.
Yeah, and it's right now, it's being borne by staffing costs. And so we will not be able to refill positions for the next couple of years. So planning and building is going to be at what its staffing level is now. So it's going to take longer for encroachment permits. Any type of permit to be issued, plan check review. Town hall hours are still going to be from 8:30 to 12. Public Works, we have 2 people on Public Works. There will be no staff development. So the issues that we have right now with the experience level of our staff, that's not going to change. We have no career advancement in our staffing levels. So we don't have an entry-level position, intermediary position, management level position. And quite frankly, if those positions that are currently vacant, had they been filled, we would be talking about laying off 6 people now. And I don't know how other organizations work, but if you're going to lay off a third of your staff, that's going to draw some questions on the viability of the organization.
Right, and so my point being is that $1 million seems awfully low to me. And that we should be borrowing more, particularly since you said that it costs us 2% and we can get more than that in the market, so why not? But also it seems to me we're more likely than not to need the fund.
Yes.
I note that Sarah has her hand up again. Sarah Warnickoff?
Yeah, I was just gonna note, I believe, Tony, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we had discussed $1 million as an example. But basically the value, we're gonna learn much more about this, as Tony said, at the council meeting next week. Staff is working on that. But based on what I was told from the county is that it's whatever property that we would select. So it could be, as for example, a soccer field. It could be the parcels that are up in Woodside Highlands. Who knows which exact property we would ultimately choose, but it would be, the lease back would be based on that specific property. So we could pick a property based on the value of the income, the, for lack of a better word, the loan amount that we would want. So $1 million is just being used as an example right now. I just wanted to clarify that point. The other thing, Tony, if you could share with everybody is how it's paid back, because I think that's an important element of it as well.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. That's basically through our property tax allocation. So December, April, they will withhold a portion of our corporate property tax as a debt service.
So I'd like to recommend or comment that Half Moon Bay use their library as
Mhm.
their lease back vehicle. And we have buildings right here in town center that we could do the same thing for, which would allow us to borrow more money.
And is this sort of payback fully amortized, or is there a balloon at the end? How does it work?
I haven't seen an offer sheet, so I don't the actual workings of the payback, but I believe it's just going to be straight line,
Straight line over how many years?
5 years, 6 years, I mean, however we set it up.
Half Moon Bay payments were every 2 years,
Mhm.
or I think 10 years.
Yeah, but like I said, we're still having meetings. We have one with the county this week. And we'll probably get some more information as far as, because I mean, we need to bring this information to the council.
Yeah, well, this looks like a very attractive option.
Mhm.
As I think everyone is
Right.
commenting.
Right, and
I
as the county said, that they can't loan us the money directly. It's, they got to have some type of
Asset.
vehicle process.
I would disagree. This is not a good, I would not recommend this to the finance committee nor to the town council nor anyone who's listening, is that you do not borrow money if you cannot afford to repay it back. It's just, it's simple, straightforward. You spend less than you earn and you do not borrow money if you cannot pay it back. Such a loan would never be available from the free market. This is a recipe for losing property, losing control of the property, imposing new taxes on the citizens. We need to get our financial house in order. That means that we need to spend less than we earn to, within a limited degree, I think, build back some reserve, but not nearly to the degree that I think it had been before, because that actually shielded problems for years. This is a loan. The town cannot afford to take a loan because we cannot afford to pay it back.
Yeah, just to have a dialogue on that a little bit. I think the plan, though, is to put it into an account where we actually earn a profit on the funds and we don't spend them. It's there for an emergency. Would you feel the same way if that's the rationale?
I understand that it would go into the general fund and the use of those funds would be at the discretion of the town council. I think that is very dangerous. Even if there's an arbitrage, we are not in the arbitrage business. We are in the business of collecting 7% of the property taxes a year, charging a reasonable amount for planning and building services. And actually, it's a pretty limited function that we have. And of that approximately 7% of the collective property taxes that we get, being as judicious with it as we can be. And right now, we're barely, through a lot of work that Tony's talked about, we're barely able to actually get to a break-even budget after years of very significant fiscal deficit spending. That, I think, this town needs to turn a new page. No more deficit spending, and absolutely do not take on debt you cannot afford.
Tony, update us. I think on the last time you did the budget projections, you showed that at the end of this past fiscal year, our cash reserve level had fallen to what number? Was it around 25 or 26%?
It was 1.5 million, but we identified some other, so it's about 1.9, which is about 24, 25%.
And as a percent, and so the percentage of our going forward expenditures was it the order of 25 or 26%?
Yeah.
Okay. And under that budget, at the end of this fiscal year, that number would be down closer to 9 or 10 before the council started adjusting to try to balance the budget.
Well, the budget that was proposed, had there been no changes, there'd be a deficit.
Would be- okay.
And so coming back with a balanced budget where there's zero, we're gonna keep the reserve levels as close to flat as possible over the next couple of years until we get to the charter town.
Okay, so today we are already way under
way under 60.
the, what has been the 60%
Mhm.
reserve level, which raises two issues. Number one, we talked about one of them here is that the right reserve level or should it be something
Mhm.
else? And you know, Mark or, you know, Chris and I had our subcommittee and we came up with a, you know, fully developed reason why and this is something the council could decide, obviously, or would have to decide. They, instead of having a specific number, in this case, 60%, it should be a target range,
Mhm.
which you can be comfortable anywhere within the range. And the bottom end of that range is around 20 or 25%. So you wouldn't do any quote unusual things, be it borrowing or anything else, unless you were below that lower end range. That was a policy we came up with, a recommendation based on opportunity costs of having too much cash and a number of other things. But it gives the council a way, if they chose, to justify accepting, you know, for some time, a much lower reserve level than they've had in the past, but at a reasonable level, which might help ameliorate the, you know, the issue that we're talking about here about, you know, well, first of all, you don't want to have a reserve policy that's just on paper and doesn't mean anything, right? There has to be consequences if the reserve policy is 60%. The consequences are a lot worse than if the policy is 20 or 25% as the bottom end of the range. That gives them a way perhaps to go in the direction without a lease back for at least a period of time. Again, you know the numbers better than I do on that. So, you know, maybe there's a way out of this without doing the lease back, at least now. But council would have to say, okay, it's no longer 60%. It's, you know, they buy some version of what we proposed here, or maybe even something lower than that. And the backup plan is if we get into an emergency, a short-term emergency, or we drop below, you know, 20 or 15%, then we do one of a couple of things. And, you know, there's a couple of options. The lease back is one that's on the table. The other one we talked about is borrowing short-term from the open space fund and doing a guaranteed payback within 1 year with a guaranteed source of funds. That buys us another year to maybe defer doing a lease back or doing something else through a tax measure. So it opens up the opportunity to buy some more time to figure out how we get the reserve number off the floor.
And I guess the only thing I would add to that is, you know, we're gonna have cost increases. And we're gonna talk about the sheriff's contract. But if any cost increases exceed what I'm projecting, then I have to find cuts somewhere else. And right now, that's gonna be staff.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're 14 now.
Yeah.
Can't go any lower.
Well, I think, but that's to the point that Mark was making, is that we need to have an action plan to increase revenue
Right,
so that we can provide the services that the town requires.
right. But if
And
something were to
we're not-
happen over the next
we're
couple
not-
of years,
Yeah, you know, so, you know, until we have that action plan that we believe we can really achieve, then you have to run with a balanced budget. You take a loan and you get $1 million plus, you might get a little sloppy in your operating. Not that you will, but overall, there might be another sigh of relief. Oh, we have a reserve.
Right.
We can afford to bring a few more people on to function X, Y, or Z. So I guess I am similarly concerned that we still need to put the focus on the new revenue plan.
Mhm.
And we do, as Bill mentioned, we have options to get loans from ourselves by taking a loan from open space, right? So I mean, if we need a cash reserve, it's available. I'd rather see us putting our efforts into a strong revenue plan rather than negotiating with the county to take a loan. Just my thinking. But maybe we should talk about the long-term option.
Yeah.
We kind of stopped here at this lease back number 6 under short-term.
Right.
I am I would just note to reiterate what Bill said. We did propose that you could take a loan from one of the reserve funds. So that's not showing up as a short-term option. And we know that within the open space fund, we have somewhere between $8 and $9 million. Seems easy to structure a loan to give us a buffer in case of emergency.
One of the things that concerned me when 10 minutes ago, Tony was going through the list of consequences for staff rehiring and training and so forth. That sounds like the same list we were going through about 30 minutes ago when we're asking what happened in the previous 3 years, why we couldn't keep our records straight and our numbers updated. And, we talked a little bit about software problems, but a lot of what was in this MOD and, our other observations of others, we didn't have trained people, they couldn't do the jobs, they couldn't do them consistently and so forth. We said, we don't want to do that again. Your list sounded like a prescription for, let's do it again. And see,
Well,
hope for a better outcome.
if we
But
don't address it, yeah, we're heading right back down into that road.
Yeah, I
And
don't
that's
think
why
we
I'm bringing
wanna
it up. But
repeat
the
history.
other thing is we are still obligated. We have compliance reports that we have to do. We're cutting staff. The workload's not being cut. So if we don't have a staff person to do it, we have to hire a contractor to do it. So, you're backing us into a corner here. That if I'm making these cuts on the backs of staff, I have to fill it with contractors. And we all know how we feel about consultants and the use of consultants. We're still going to continue to use consultants if we continue down this road. And for the next couple of years, it's going to be very lean. And without staff, we're risking falling back into the same condition we just came out of.
Are there activities that can be eliminated rather than simply positions?
If it's compliance, no. There's some activities, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, because simply cutting people, but to do the same workload, that puts you into a death spiral, right? You
Yeah.
can't, everyone's overworked, they're further overworked and demoralized, and then they leave. And so now you're in a crisis, et cetera. That isn't going to work. Cutting optional activities, whatever it is, services, to free up workloads so that fewer people do less stuff. And they still, we obviously have to do the finance and compliance first and foremost, but that's something really to look at.
Right, and
Long and
that's part of the process that we're gonna go through with the budget is, or for 25, 26 is, okay, what's the appropriate staffing level? What service levels can we get away with? Knowing that we have the compliance issues.
Right.
But what's gonna be the right balance of staff and the use of contractors to provide the services that we still have to provide? We're not going to be developing staff. And so we're going to have continuous turnover in staff. And there's a cost associated with hiring and training and rehiring and retraining. It's a circle, and it's a circle we need to get out of.
Isn't there some way then to include or put in staff development funds on the basis that you're actually not saving money now?
I would love to, but I mean, the priority is going to be what costs we can control, like the sheriff's contract, our benefits, our insurance. Those are baked in increases every year. And it's the only discretion I have now is staff and supplies and some of our other contracts. But if it's to provide a service, it's a service that we need to provide. I mean, I know it sounds like word salad, but we are a service providing organization.
Right. That's why the town exists.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that we don't have a consensus on our committee as to what is the appropriate level of expenditures. And one thing we asked for a couple of months ago was a 5-year plan, and Tony has put together I think it's 5-year forecast.
Mhm.
And I think it would be very worthwhile, George, for us to have on our next meeting, to have Tony present that to us so that we can see what is this budget? Because in my opinion, it's not normal and it's not what the citizens of the town expect. And we'll find that out if we put in front of them a proposal to raise taxes for greater services. But in any case, I think we, as a group, need to see this forecast so we understand, are we operating under normal circumstances where we don't need to increase revenue? Or do we need to increase revenues because the services that the town needs aren't being provided anymore? And I think that the question that Bill just raised about, aren't we going back to where we were in 2020, 21 time period in terms of the personnel in the finance department, is probably happening throughout all the departments as we cut back.
Mhm.
But I don't know that until we actually see the numbers and see what's going on.
Yeah, fair enough. Looking at this and getting a handle on it, I think the operating sort of assumption now is that we're heading for the next general election in 2 years
Mhm.
to look at becoming a charter town and enacting the real estate transfer tax. And so this isn't a long-term plan here not to invest appropriately in services and development and everything else. It's just trying to figure a way to make it the 2 years in a reasonable way so that we can adopt a revenue structure that makes more sense for where we are today.
So I'll just continue. Just the last two, the White's fees to the affordable house. This is the Willow Commons fee waiver that actually was processed out of the Affordable Housing Fund into the general fund. And then the declaration of fiscal emergency, council said no. Then moving on to the long-term options, become a charter town. That was unanimous from the council. The other items, not necessarily clear, but things that we're going to be pursuing is renegotiate with the San Mateo County Sheriff. We did meet with them today. We'll be meeting with the county as well. There's going to be some back and forth, hopefully to get some future credits. Private fundraising, there really wasn't any direction from the council on that one. Negotiate higher property tax allocation from San Mateo County. Again, no direction from the county or from the council. Modernize the telephone UUT ordinance. That is something that we can pursue. Again, we can do that in the November 26th election. We don't have to declare a fiscal emergency on that. It is a general tax, so just updating the language. We're not increasing the rate, so to speak. So just updating the language, or modernizing the language, I should say. And then other items that they would like the finance committee to consider. The reserve levels, they did talk about the reserve levels. Annexation with either Ladera or shared services merger with the town of Woodside. These are long-term conversations. Annexation, shared services, I mean, those are multiple year conversations. But these are some of the things that the council would like the finance committee to discuss, research, review, and provide some guidance.
And speaking of town council, I notice, Sarah, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in related to the discussion about the services and you know, Craig can't be there today, and there was a comment at the last meeting about kind of the information flow between the council and the finance committee. So I'm just, thanks for indulging me with chiming in a little bit here. I'm just trying to give visibility from my side of things. And so when the discussion was being had about what could be impacted. I mean, as you heard from Tony, there was consensus amongst the council to bring forward a balanced budget for this year, and that's what's happening. I will not be on the council when we go into the 25-26 and into the early 26-27 before we might have a revenue measure. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight the types of things, you know, as has been discussed in planning and building, you know, balanced budget would continue delays and things like the permit processing, including encroachment permits, which is a really frustrating process for community members to wait for their projects, things like plan checks for approvals and inspections. We are about to have another kind of lift of work to do on our housing element. So that's incremental work. A bunch of the items, you know, if anybody wanted to see the work that is kind of waiting in the pipeline, it's all in the annual report that we have with HCD. There's a whole backlog of things that we haven't been able to get to, and we're going to hear about it from them when they do their next annual report this coming spring. We also have additional work coming up with the Sunrise provision. So that's with just in the planning and building department. As mentioned, you know, town hall, we only are open 4 days a week in the mornings right now. Another spot where you were saying, where could we cut, you know, staffing supports committees. So maybe there's an opportunity for limited supporting the committees. Communications is another one. We sorely need website updates. We're down a communications person. So this will continue to impact communications. HR, I know, you know, we have a backlog of compliance issues with our documentation there. PRAs, we have them coming in at a steady clip. Our ability to respond to those will continue to be limited. Tony, you can speak to this one better because I don't understand it as well, but roads and highways, my understanding is we have compliance issues, compliance work to do there that enables us to recoup our full gas tax. There's compliance issues on sustainability. And then, of course, it's not getting to any of our capital expenditure needs, you know, over 3 years. So that's just a little more color and detail on the things that would more or less be frozen over the next, you know, after this fiscal year, the following months, 18 months after that, if we held it to these levels. I just wanted to share that detail again for visibility and context. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really helpful.
And Georgia wanted to add to the gas tax. So we have to do an annual streets report. We're behind, and we're so far behind that they've withheld highway users tax funds from us. They say that once we get up to date, they'll get the backlog back to us, but yeah, the gas tax funds are what we use to maintain our streets and roads.
And roughly how much money is that?
I think the backlog now is about 200,000.
Okay. What's the plan for addressing it? Certainly-
Well, Christian Company is just about to submit the report for 2023.
Got it.
And that'll
Great.
get us up to date.
Yeah.
And we're working on the 24th.
Yeah, that's an easy one to make economic case for paying a consultant.
Absolutely. And then the other attachment you have is the sheriff's contract.
Yep.
So
Hey,
this,
Tony, before we move there, just back on the budget, I've attended the last 2 town council meetings, which, you know, I've shared. I had never attended a town council meeting, but I have gone to the last 2 because I was particularly focused on if the town council was actually going to move towards a balanced budget and if there was going to be a declaration of a fiscal emergency. I was particularly focused on that. And that's really where I started to key in on, what we discussed here as a forum, how does that get communicated there? And then what is that? Because there is no direct interaction. But one of the things that I did notice in the last 2 meetings, this may not be indicative of the way that the process really works, is that I was pleasantly surprised, but I was proud of the town council to actually have adopted, to have that financial discipline, to adopt a balanced budget, recognizing that it's not an easy thing to do in these circumstances. One thing that I also saw, those the two town councils, was that the town council really is the body that approves expenses through the warrant list. It's not, that, as I understand it, that authority and it's not delegated to the town manager and the director of finance for that. It's really at the town council level, I think. But so I did see these last two meetings, this warrant list be approved by the town council, which means that these expenditures get approved. What I didn't see, though, was any reconciliation or reporting on, okay, this is what expenses have been approved. This is what the budget is. So any business I've been involved with, you have at least a monthly meeting where there is here's budget, here's actual year to date, here's the discrepancy. So you have at least a monthly measure of how you are progressing against particularly expenditures in this case. In free market enterprises, it's also revenues, because revenues are highly subject. Here, they're much more determined. So it's really around expense control. Is that process, what is the process by which the town council has an understanding of where they are in the fiscal year against their spending plan?
Fair point. It's a report that we are required to produce, that I'm still currently developing. But it's beginning fund balance, monthly expenses, revenues, and then an update on the reserve. But yes, it is the responsibility of me to provide that information to the council. And those are the processes that I'm currently developing. But it's,
Okay, I didn't mean to burden you with a
Yeah.
further task. It just struck me as a very reasonable thing before
It
I
is,
approve.
it is.
Before I approve any expense,
Right.
I want to know, where are we on the budget? Actually, I haven't seen that, I haven't seen that question asked of you when the warrant list has been approved, which
Mhm.
struck me as frankly bizarre.
right, yeah, but it's also my responsibility to make sure that what gets on the warrant list is appropriate and within budget.
Yeah, 6 months, I trust you, but I don't know.
Right.
I don't
No,
know
I-
what happened.
yeah,
that
no,
may
but
not be-
it's-
I don't-
it's-
yeah,
it's-
I mean,
yeah.
we're in this whole, I don't know what happened the last 3
Yeah.
years, because actually presumably the town council approved warrant lists without a clear understanding of what they were approving. I think, I could be completely wrong. That could be a mischaracterization of what happened, but.
Yeah,
okay.
not being here, I don't know what was communicated to council by the town manager. But it's the responsibility of the finance department to do that. And it will be the responsibility of the finance department to do that. But I can't speak onto how it was done prior to my arrival.
So
But
I thought-
I can say that it was information that was sorely lacking.
So when the town council approves a budget, it was my understanding that that gives approval for the town manager to execute that budget, and therefore the expenditures are already approved. And then there's a secondary, this warrant list that comes down to the exact checks that are being written.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's approved through the budget.
Going back to the staffing issue you're raising, I think it's come up a couple times in here, and citizens have called in, pointing out that we have many resources in town, people, personnel with accounting backgrounds. So here's an open-ended question. If you could get 20 hours a week of, heads down service on accounting, financing stuff from, one or two or three people who have experience in the field, they have to be shown, how the town works and, how to log in and look at the accounts. But they have the capability to do work and to look at numbers and understand what they're doing with a minimal amount of training. How enthusiastic would you be to having that? I mean, you have to guess a little bit about what the training would involve and how much time that would take away. But There are resources there, and one or two
There
of
are-
them
there
might be
are.
on this committee and some of them aren't.
There are,
but-
and people have volunteered, but it'd be 20 hours a week of training just to get all the different fund buckets, understanding that, and have to process a journal entry. And it's not just, here's a journal entry, debit, cash, credit, revenue. It's which fund does it go to? Which account does it go to? Is this, what tax is this? Is this a fee? And just understanding the chart of accounts, that would be the majority of my time to somebody who has no experience in governmental accounting. Governmental accounting is a completely different beast than financial accounting. And it's not that I don't appreciate the help and the offers. It's the time I'm going to have to dedicate to train folks, considering the backlog of what I have to deal with now. Something's got to give. And that might be something we might be able to do once we get caught up in all the audits. But to have someone come in and help with just processing transactions and inputting them into the system, that's going to be the intricate part of training. And upfront time, I don't have that time right now. But it's something that I would like to develop. But I don't want to dismiss it. It's just getting to that point is going to be a lot of time.
Before we move on, in terms of the long-term options, the FC, the famous initials, is there anything we should start working on, or can we defer it until January or something? I mean,
Well, I defer to the committee, whichever tasks you feel the committee would want to take on. These are
Well-
all coming from the council, but I mean, we've had some conversation on reserve levels. And there has been some conversation on UUT. So we have some research done there. The other two, the shared services and annexation, I mean, we can get started on those, but like I said, we've already had a couple of conversations on two of the items.
well, in terms of like the charter town, well, having worked with Ken on this, to me, the next step is to figure out what we want in the charter. But that's a year and a half off. so
Right.
So
And then it's
there's-
at what point do we start taking up those conversations?
we-
Because I mean, backing from November 26th, we have to have the ballot language done by this time. And so, but we've got significant amount of time to vet that process.
Okay, so, yeah, so we agree that the charter town can wait a few months.
And UUT as well, because
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, and the reserve levels we've already addressed, I guess, in a way. We just haven't come to a conclusion. Personally, the shared services with the town of Woodside, and I'm not sure that's a finance committee core competency.
Well, I mean, there's cost implications that, I would like the finance committee to weigh in on. Cost benefit.
Okay, yeah, but we need to see those, we
Right.
need numbers that,
Yeah.
we can't just go on the internet and
Mhm.
search like we did for charter
Right.
town. Okay.
So before we move on, there's one item that the town council moved on that was not endorsing the 2% UUT from the open space and changing that. I'd like to actually recommend that they reconsider that. Have this committee recommend to the council that they reconsider that. Because it basically seems to me that that's akin to fiddling while Rome burned. And I think it's wrong, and inappropriate, to ask the citizens to continue to pay $350,000 to $400,000 a year to the open space fund when when we need these funds for basic services that the town provides people. And therefore, I think they made a poor choice there, and that if they reconsidered it, maybe they'd see the wisdom of it.
Well, the special election is gonna cost 120,000
Right, well,
once.
I thought it was 55,000.
No, it's 120.
Okay.
And that would,
It's 120 if other jurisdictions put a ballot measure, then the cost can be shared. But as of right now, we would be the only ones putting a measure in March.
Well, but then you could also do it at the same time as you do the charter town. So,
Yeah, but that's in 2026.
right, but I read that the town, I didn't go to the town council meeting, but what I heard from what you wrote us in our package, that they turned down this change. They didn't turn it down just with the special election. They turned it down in general.
Yeah, I mean, it was not, yeah, it wasn't, well, I mean, the direction was no on that item.
That's why I'm suggesting that this committee pass a resolution asking them to reconsider that.
Reconsider it for March or reconsider it for,
Either one.
I think the
Economic.
point to add to what you're saying is there's one proposed new revenue stream, and it's called Charter Town. And I think that's out there as a silver bullet.
Right.
There's really these other ones we're all kind of scratching our head about, the viability of them, other than reserve levels, which we can solve pretty quickly with a policy change. So I guess I feel like we're losing focus on revenue because have some comfort that we can get a loan.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead. Go ahead. I told you, but
Thank you, Urban. So I think what I'm hearing in general is what are the revenue plays that we're going to pursue?
I would like to add that on the number one was a balanced budget with no new revenue.
Yeah, understood, but our service levels may be
Will be impacted.
non-viable long-term.
Right.
Right? So our job is to make recommendations
Mhm.
for, we need new revenue. Yeah, so I don't know what we're gonna do. If we're all just gonna say charter town and loan, as a
Well,
finance committee member, I think that's,
well, Charter Town is new revenue, right?
yeah, but we're betting that 2 years from now, charter town is going to be approved by the citizens.
Sure. But any of these other revenue requirements have the same requirement, and some of them supermajority
Yes,
requirements that are harder than a Charter Town.
yes.
Yeah.
I just think I guess maybe I'm sharing what Mark said. When you take a loan, you have a false sense.
Yeah,
Or-
I'm hearing that from everyone here, and I
Yeah.
think I'm persuaded. I understand that from my perspective, having the money, if it were sequestered and never to be used except in an emergency, given it would be free, would be great. But I understand the concept that I've heard elsewhere is that inevitably it would relax fiscal discipline, because people would realize they have the money, so they dip into that. So I think I'm persuaded by that the loan is not something that I think would be a great idea either. But we need new revenue, particularly given the next topic, which is, we'll have to get done pretty quickly, the sheriff's contract. And without declaring an emergency and going to a special election while we're still having a lot of audits that we're behind on, so figure out the politics of that, right? Without doing that, we're 2 years away, and so what's the fix? And right now, the town council is thinking charter town, real estate transfer tax, and that sounds like a very reasonable proposal to me, but we have to get from here to there.
Mhm.
Can we talk about the sheriff's contract? perhaps?
Yeah, so the chart that you have in front of you, kind of shows the $1 million in credits. If you look at the 23-24 was 426,000. 20, and that was the sheriff's deferring the first 6 months of the new contract. They billed us at the old rate for the first 6 months, so that's where that credit comes from. And then the county administrative office gave us the $634,000 in credits over the next 24-25 and 25-26. But if you can see, the last column is the cost of the general fund. And I went all the way back to 2018-19 because that was the previous contract was 2018 to 2023. And as you can see, it went from 1 million in 18-19 to 1.3 million in 22-23. With the credits, it was a slight increase. And also the use of ARPA funds, it was a slight increase to the general fund. But then it goes up 340,000 in 24-25 and another 450,000 in 25-26. And so, but the actual cost of the contract is around 30 to 35% of our general fund budget. And so that's what we're working with the sheriff's office to see if we can come up with some relief in that area. But this chart just kind of shows just the sheriff's contract is always going to go up. From 18-19 to 22-23, the average was 9%. 23-24, it was a 57% increase because they had renegotiated some new contracts with their bargaining groups. There was a slight increase. We do have an amended amount for 24-25. That was 1.5%. But we still have the contract credit from the county. And then we're assuming a 10% increase for 25-26 and 26-27, just based on historical activity. We still have our public safety augmentation fund sales tax money of about 15,000 per year. And then we have our COPS grant of 250,000. So that's there to offset some of these costs. But again, the general fund over the next 3 years, it's going to be almost $1 million increase.
You mentioned meeting with the sheriff today. How did that go?
It was just, here's where we are. Here's what's going on, letting them know, because they had just sent us a bill. And I'm like, we would like to pay in December and June because of our cash flow. And then also just to kind of test the waters for where they were with any type of relief. And they're going to go back and look at what the services that they provide. And then we also talked about converting the front conference room part of it as the sheriff office. And they were very amenable to that. We thought it was a better location than where they are now. So those are some of that was the gist of the conversation that we had today. And then we have follow-up conversations with the county.
Tony, quick question. The COPS grant, 250,000,
Mhm.
is that guaranteed?
Yes.
Or is that?
Yes,
plan
that is, that's a state sales tax. It was Proposition 172. So these monies come in every year.
Okay. But it's going up from 145 to 250.
Yes,
And
yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Great.
yeah. I'm gonna, unless cash flow goes down, but yeah, we have a recession.
Yeah.
But it is sales tax.
Okay.
Is the 10% increases in 25, 26, 26, 27, that's contractual?
No, that's my estimate.
And why is it so
Because
far
it
above
was,
inflation?
because there's other costs outside of inflation. There's personnel costs, benefits.
No, I understand that.
So-
So that's typical of governmental employment
Mhm.
contracts, 10% a year. And this may not be a question for you, but the service levels we get in terms of response times and FTEs and all that, is that based on some sort of objective criteria as to where we want them to be because of historical experience or safety concerns, or was it just mandated to us? And is there room to look at that objectively and say, you know what, we can actually do pretty well with one less FTE?
Well, that's what we're doing right now.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
is in process.
Yeah.
So right now, at one time we had like 2-year, 3-year contracts. So right now it's a 1-year contract. Is that right?
It's a 1-year contract. We have to notify them in January that we're not, but we're gonna go with the contract because we just don't have an option.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
yes.
one time it
1 year,
was,
it's 1-year increments. Yeah.
yeah, and hopefully it's only 10.
Only, yeah.
Only.
I'm cognizant of the time, and I'm just going to raise this as an idea. So maybe if there's some traction and other people want to learn more, I'd be happy to spend more time on this. But as I mentioned in the last meeting, I think from a structural perspective, I know other people may have a different opinion, but I think that we structurally as a town are structurally paying twice for police services. I'm just convinced of that. Yes, I know that there's a reallocation and all that, but I'm convinced of it. So and if you look at what our town is, it's essentially, it's right now $48 million in aggregate property taxes, of which we're supposed to get back 7. We get back less than that, 6.7%, but it's close enough, let's say. So that's about $3.4 million. That, if you look at this to the general fund in 2027, it's going to be 2.6 million of that. It's going to be the majority of what's left. It's going to, having the sheriff contract structurally within the town is, in my opinion, is going to continuously erode the resources that we have to do anything else. So let's get it out of here. So how do we get out? How do we get out from underneath the sheriff contract? So it turns out if you look at the county of San Mateo, where they get all sorts of money is that, and how they allocate it, they allocate it to both towns as well as special districts. Some of those special districts are water, some are police. For example, our own police force here, the Woodside Fire Protection District has it's significantly larger than the town. It has revenues of $27.5 million, and it's a full 1/3 of their area is Portola Valley. About 1/3 is Woodside and about 1/3 is outlying areas. They actually run it at a surplus. That is a special district. So I did look, okay, does it have to be limited to water and fire? It does not. There is actually one police special district. That one police special district is the Broadmoor district. Now, that is not a model of success. They're actually a bit upside down on their revenue and expenses too, but it actually means that I think that that's just because they're subscale. An idea that I had is perhaps trying to do the work necessary to whatever bodies make this decision to expand, not create a special district that has its own duplicative administrative cost, but to actually go to the Woodside Fire Protection District and have them expand their scope to include police. The way they're funded is that they're not funded through a reallocation through a town. They're actually funded directly from the property taxes themselves through a special district. I think structurally, that or something like that is the only way we can avoid getting double taxed or double charged for police services. We already, whether we know it or not, or whether we're conscious of it, we already rely upon a very significant public safety service to that special district. It doesn't have to be limited to purely fire safety. I think if there's a will to do so, if there's a political will to do so, we can expand that to be a broader public safety organization, which is very well funded, directly funded from property taxes, and already has an administrative staff exactly across the street that actually has a larger finance staff than Tony has, that actually is able to manage all of this stuff. So I think that the core purpose of the town is actually zoning and permitting. That's really fundamentally what the town does. I think that kind of policing kind of is an adjunct that we're not, there's not really a core function. There is another core function around public safety. So that was the idea that I had. And I floated it, so I just, anyways, I think it would require obviously a broader discussion, both at the town council as well as at the county. Not easy, but I think that that's actually something to consider to enable us to get out of the 2.6 million and have it be done in a more thoughtful, rational way that is better allocated and more, actually, and more appropriate for the taxpayers of Portola Valley.
Hey, Mark, thank you. Yeah, I want to thank you for the idea. We should talk about that. I'm quite concerned that we've got the ASCC arriving and we only have a few minutes to completely wrap up and get out of town here so that they can move on to the dais. I just want to hear from members of the public very quickly, less than a minute each if you could, and then we will get out of here. In the room, Ellen? Let's go quick because we want to be done before 6.
Just a quick question. What would it take to have, instead of a full sheriff's service, have maybe service officers in town that aren't law enforcement, but that could handle other things so we can have less of a sheriff's cost? I don't know, how much cheaper it could be or what they would be allowed to handle, or I don't even know how much the sheriff's department handles right now as far as what services they're giving us, but could some of them be turned over to service officers instead of the sheriff's department?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Dave Cardinal.
Thanks, George. A few quick questions or comments. On the UUT, I agree with Ken. I think the town is a little bit head in sand over not thinking we want that extra revenue. I think it's more of a critical issue than that. I'd like to see us do that. Second, as far as the sheriff's department, we basically get one full-time equivalent 24/7, which takes about 4.5 people if you do the math. So that's, Woodside pays twice what we do and they get 2. We could get less. I think the sheriff would be happy to provide us with less because they can't hardly hire people. So we could always cut that back. That's totally up to whoever. And on the Woodside Fire Protection District, they are absolutely not equipped to do public safety. I mean, I'm very familiar with them. It's not what they do. They don't arrest people. They don't run police. They put the wet stuff on the hot stuff and they save us from heart attacks. So I don't see any, and they don't really run a profit per se. We're still raising another $20 million to help pay for the Station 7 remodel in Woodside. So it's not like they're brimming with money. So thank you.
Thank you, David. And I'm afraid I have to cut it off right there in order to let the ASCC start on time. So I apologize for a couple of comments that we aren't able to get to. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
A second.
All right. In favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned at 5:58 PM, giving 2 minutes for the ASCC people to run up and